Hello, Mindy.
Hi, Kimberly. It's so great to be here.
Oh my gosh, it's such a treat to have you back on the show. I'm trying to think the last time must have been maybe 2020. Is that right?
Yes, that sounds about right.
Yes. And then before then, I mean, probably a couple other times going back 20 years, right?
It's so fun to just follow the threads of growth and connection over the years. I really, really am grateful to stay in touch.
Absolutely. It's a treat. And I want to start by diving into a really kind of big question. And of course, I have my notes to the right. So it's as you think about your perspective on life, and I've followed and been part of your journey for many years. How has it changed as you've entered midlife? And I know you had a hip replacement, so we can definitely talk about that. And that, of course, has so many effects on one's like mobility. So, what have you noticed?
I think for sure the biggest changes have been how I move through the world. The pace of life has really, really, for me, been about slowing down. And not because I feel like I have less to offer or less to give, but it's just really a more truer alignment to what my energy is. And it really reflects in how I take care of myself and what I do want to do in my life and being able to be resourced and rested and really just like fully give that passion and energy and joy to what we love to do. And I really moved, I think, past that season, which I think was for a long time of hustling and growing and just kind of like a constant kind of chasing feeling of trying to get from point A to point B. And there's so much softening in midlife, just into what is, into how to be present to what I really love and the people who I really love. And to really just integrate and go deeper on all the things that I've been teaching about, learning about in community with people on, and realize that there's so much richness just in revisiting these familiar but really important themes in life to go deeper rather than to think of something new or do it expand into a different pathway. It's all these days so much more about just softening and deepening, which I feel like speaks to midlife in so many ways, right? The wisdom of these years and just really tending to what is true rather than trying to fit into the pace of life or certain boxes that I think we do when we are younger.
When we had a lot more energy.
It's really true. It's really true. And it's changing like the rhythm of everything I do in terms of like just my day to day, but also I am a person that really moves through ritual and rhythm and routine. And so I really just, especially in these last several years, just cultivated a flow and rhythm that supports me to be able to show up in my most alive and passionate and creative and inspired self. And that's not to say like life does not get in the way because it absolutely does, because the physical body is absolutely something that we are contending with here in midlife. As you said, I just had a hip replacement, but I feel like it's also integrating and moving through and taking care of not just the physical body, but that is certainly an obstacle that shows up in new ways. But it's really also taking care of the emotional body and our spiritual body and our collective body and our psychological body. So we're moving with all these things at the same time. And it's a lot. It's really a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. Well, and I love your idea and the 2 words that really stuck out to me, softening and tending, right? And I think this has been such a big piece of really what we've tried to share over the past many years, and yet it's not always easy to do for ourselves. But things like a hip replacement kind of force that, right? But also coming to this stage in life where we're just reflecting and shifting and, making changes. And I feel like you've been on that path. Like I remember running into you 2014 at Squam. It's such a treat to see you live.
Oh,
So
long
fun. So long ago. And you were in a big shift at that time, right? So all these journeys. So, any of our listeners who may not be familiar with how lovely you are and your beautiful creative path, would you just share a little bit about your journey and just kind of thinking back to when we first connected, which was in early blogging days? Maybe, I don't know, would it have been oh 05 or something? I'm not even sure.
Yes, I mean, I think it really was the beginning of the podcasting days. So, whenever you first started podcasting, I think that's where we crossed paths. So, way back in the tranquil chick days of deep in the archives, like I remember sitting in my bathtub thinking like, "This is so cool. We get to like connect with like-minded spirits from just far away." But that time in my life, I was really coming back to myself. I feel like I was at a time in early motherhood, in a time of really questioning where I was putting my energy towards, and just really understanding that I, in a lot of ways, had lost myself, just didn't know exactly what I wanted, who I was, even prioritizing my own voice, my own inner voice, and my own needs. So I think those early blogging years were so much about just reconnecting with my own inner self and meeting lots and lots and lots of other creative folks who were doing the same thing. It was kind of a really unique time, right? Just a real awakening for so many of us into community, but also realizing that creativity wasn't just something that I like to do. It really was a way of life for me. It was a path of life. It was an energetic force that kind of drove me forward and also that really nurtured me and took care of me and connected me to others who move through the world in a similar way. So from that time and throughout the ever evolving twists and turns of life, I feel like my creativity has definitely brought me to different pathways of understanding, again, how this energy moves through us and how our bodies are such an important part of that energy that if certain parts of us aren't working, it really hinders and slows down our energy in our creative ways and trying to align and juggle all the different things so we feel like we are again, most in our alignment, most in our own attunement, and can hear our own voice and listen to our own needs so that we can tend the things that are important to us. And a big part of that was like really understanding like the cultural expectations of how, especially for women, I think how we're socialized to always put everybody else's needs before us. That was something that I really had to learn as well, that was something I internalized and had to rework that really has been about understanding that I can prioritize tending to my own needs and life while also taking care of others because that is important as well. So, and just that we're all connected in those ways, but that we shouldn't feel badly about taking care of ourselves.
So, what have you found to be most helpful to have a positive mindset of sorts, right? And resilience, knowing that it is such a hard time of sorts, right? With midlife and everything that's transpired, I feel like since 2020 in particular, well, since 2016, but it's just it's a lot, right? There's been a lot of change and a challenge from a global perspective. And of course, that trickles down into our individual lives. I'm just thinking for you, I know activism has always been such an important piece. And so, for you, from a mindset and resiliency perspective, can you speak to that?
Yes, I could say a lot of things about those things. But I know we don't have all day, which I would love to just sit and chat all day. Um, but okay, first, there is the activism piece. It's interesting. Over time, I really am grappling with that word because I feel like I just, in a lot of spaces, you hear the word activism and people will have an innate reaction to that. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good. And activism to me in a lot of spaces, especially through these past 4 years where we've seen a lot of social, we'll call it upheaval and conversation, which has been necessary and important around how we are showing up to our communities, to our systems, things like that. We are able to contribute in a way only when we can really understand how we fit into those systems and also how we are reacting to things. And so activism to me has felt in a lot of ways really reactive, and I especially, and I think this probably has to do what we were talking about earlier in terms of really trying to be in a space where things feel soft and things feel like we're connected to our own energy and flow. And so much of this also like speaks to somatic practices and how important it is to understand that everything that's happening socially, culturally, globally is really informed by how people's bodies are moving through time and space and like reacting to all of these things. So resilience is a big piece of this because we can talk about like the resilience of folks who are really marginalized by struggles and systems and how it positions people to have to be resilient, and you have to speak carefully about that because I think a lot of folks who feel like they don't have the same choices as some other groups of people will really have a hard time with that word. And when we talk about like our own care and tending, there is an aspect of it that is about resilience, not in the way of, I'd say, overcoming, but resilience and again, being like really in alignment and attunement with what is real, what is true, not only for us, but for everything, everyone, our communities, et cetera, around us. So I think so much of this practice for me is it's not just personal, it really is collective, and that when we think about the context of our lives and everything that we do, it's so important to consider and to understand, and it takes a lot of learning, and sometimes that learning can be really bumpy in terms of figuring out and knowing how things are impacting not only yourself, but other people and why. So I think that's been a big part of sort of this coming into middle age that has also happened during a time of like global pandemic and global racial pandemic and empire and colonization and all of these things that we hear now in just the general conversations of life, and how those things impact us on an individual level. Like there certainly is collective grief and collective trauma that we are all managing every day, especially if we're on social media. So it's a level of both personal and collective care that we're just navigating, and I'm navigating all the time. And it's just seems to be this time in midlife. It's the perfect way for me to navigate through trying to align to more softness and more less pushing and more connectivity. It really feels like the call of our time, not just the call of my own midlife challenges.
Yes, yes. Well, and I'm curious for listeners who are like, "Well, how do I learn more kind of about this and how to be more engaged?" Is there like a favorite kind of 101 book out there or resource that you would recommend?
I mean, it really, when we talk about movement and cultural organizing, like if you look to communities of color, Black women have been doing this work for centuries. Dr. Martin Luther King, if you look deeper into his work than just what we see in social media memes, you'll really understand that he was talking way back then about our interconnectedness and that how we can't get free until everyone is free in terms of liberation and divisive structures. So Bell Hooks, All About Love is a great place to start. Hood Feminism is also a great book. And aside from just reading, it's really important to actually have relationships with people across diverse communities. Because if we stay in our own bubble of what we know and who we are, we can never have any other perspective or understanding of really what is impacting folks who are in different pockets and different communities. And that can mean not only just going outside of your areas of interest, but literally getting to know your neighbors who I'm sure are probably not all like us and believe everything that we believe or value everything that we do, and traveling to different places and listening to people's stories. So, stories and just, I feel like creativity just in general helps really to bridge a lot of those gaps, which I think is so much of the practice that I am facilitating these days is using creativity as a bridge, not just, again, something to do or having an end result that's beautiful or hangs in a museum, right? The process of creativity is connective. It is it does break down barriers. It does allow story to bubble up and to find one another's humanity while in the process of doing, being, making things together.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. It's so well said. You're so good at kind of talking about all of this. You really are, and you always have been. So it is. It's a gift and it's a treat to be able to connect with you on all of this. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I think so much of it is just my own lived experience. And there certainly was a time, I'd say, not even too far back, where my own awareness was not as wide or deep as it is now. And again, it really is just, it's the practice of being willing to be curious, being willing to be vulnerable, and being willing to get things wrong, because we're always going to get things wrong. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers that prevents people from across different differences to come together, is like this real fear about, oh, what if I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing? It really is about not just talking the talk of, I want this world to be a better place, but we have to have skin in the game in doing that. And that really, our vulnerability is a big piece of that.
And so, how would you recommend listeners as you think about being more vulnerable and having skin in the game? What do you think is a good entryway or gateway for people? And I hear what you're saying, connect with others who don't think or look like you do, right? It's so important. And I think it's really helpful for listeners to even ask themselves it's how many people outside of your thought bubble or your skin bubble, right? Or your socioeconomic bubble, do you have connections with? And without judgment, no judgment here, but just to kind of ask. And sometimes we can be quite isolated. And I remember when I wrote Hip Tranquil Chick, I remember there was a part where I was writing about like minded people. And my editor was like, we don't just want like minded people. I was like, really? She was like, and I can't remember if we changed it in that book or not, but ever since then, I've used the phrase like hearted, right? Because we can have different values, or I guess maybe not so much values, but we can have different beliefs, right? But yet we can still come together with the same sort of like heart and desire for, I'll just say tranquility, right? So it's
Yes.
so important. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really do believe that what we're trying to get at is one another's humanity, and shared humanity are just basic things like a need for connection, a need for belonging, a need for safety. So we're all trying to find these things in our own ways. And so it's really recognizing that, peeling back the layers of the surface level things that make us look and feel so far away, and really also just understanding how we are divided. I think a lot of the work I do in creative circles has nothing to do with what we're making, or very little to do with what we're making. It has everything to do with connecting people back together with themselves, with each other, and with our shared humanity. So, creativity and expression is a perfect practice for this. That is vulnerable for so many people because our voices are often silenced or quieted or criticized. So, if you're looking to practice vulnerability, make some things. Practice expressing your voice, whether that's through song or dance or cooking or whatever the thing that you enjoy doing. Any kind of energy of make towards making is creative. It's not about necessarily making art with a capital A. So I think that's a great place to start. And then Making things in community is, again, a beautiful vehicle for building connection. And like you said, it's not really about like always having the same thoughts or sharing the same everything. It really is about seeing one another as human, seeing one another as worthy of care, seeing one another as worthy of respect and all of the things that we need as individual humans, and how we are all like one constellation, one system of beings together, and that what we do matters to the rest of our interconnected beings.
Do you remember sitting here on the living room floor and
Dude,
doing an event? I was that 2000, I think it's 2009 maybe. Would that be
sounds
right?
about right. Yes, and I remember we were making, collages that we were swapping out.
Yes.
It's so interesting because when I, like, look back and reflect on the work that I was doing back then, I mean, it always centered connection, it always centered collaboration, it always I really always had an orientation towards what's gonna connect us, and I've always used creativity in that way. So, I really remember that, it was so fun.
So fun. And I don't even know, how did we even share it back then? I mean, I guess there was Facebook, but I don't know that we.
Yeah, blogging, I don't know.
Yes, yeah, I guess so. Crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, it was so fun. And listeners, we just sat on my living room floor, which is tiny, and in a circle, and then we just swapped. Yeah, I think they were little boards, right? What are those boards
Yeah,
called? There's a
we're, like,
name.
just sharing canvases and making adding
Canvases.
to each other's art, which
Yeah.
all ended up with a piece that was everybody had contributed to. It was really lovely. And it was like such a good reminder that you don't need like a big, huge, fancy studio and expensive supplies and even a table. Like, right? You can do these things and create these kinds of communities. And it really is about what you're creating energetically, not at the end of the day, it wasn't about, "Oh, I have this great painting," which was lovely to have, but it really was about like, "Oh, I got to sit in this circle of other people and just have this experience that was so lovely that I remember even today." So, those are the things that you tuck into your heart. And I don't even know if I still have the piece of art, but I have that experience, like, banked in my system, and yeah, it's just that's what it's about.
So fun. And do you remember you brought me Chanel perfume? I think it was Chance.
I remember. It's 'cause
So
you love
sweet.
Chanel.
I had never had a Chanel perfume, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so over the top and amazing." I still have it, because I have it in my office, so I'll just spritz it from time to time, so it's, like,
Oh,
how many years old, but
nice.
still fabulous.
I love doing little housewarming gifts. I mean, gifting for me is one of my love languages, so
So sweet. I totally still remember that. But can you imagine sitting on the floor now? Like, I don't know that I could sit on the floor and do art now.
Right? I know, and especially, like, with this hip, and it's since surgery, so I'm about 6 weeks post-surgery.
Oh,
It's so much better than it was, but it is a process, and I'm so grateful that you shared so much of your experience because I really use that as a resource. I was like, "All right, if Kimberly can do it, I can definitely do this too." But it was gnarly, like, the first couple of weeks are pretty gnarly, and what I realized too is, like, so much of the medical what they call healthcare is really not about care. It really is about it's very clinical, and the care part comes from, like, the people who actually take care of you after, and the long-term things that we have to do to tend to our well-being. And that definitely I don't know if you would say this, but for me, it was like it was not like the hospitals and the kind of medical clinical settings. It was really like the aftercare that I received. Everybody seemed to be in such a hurry for me to leave the hospital and get better and everything will be fine. There was a lot of that. And it's the nuance of the experience, the actual experience is so much more than that.
did you do the posterior or anterior?
I had a posterior approach.
Me too, and everyone should have done anterior, and I realized that, like, it's supposed to be much quicker healing, scars different, And all those things we couldn't do afterwards, a lot of them you can do with the anterior. But I really love the bedside manner of the posterior guy. So I went with him, but I need to get the other hip done. I think I'll do anterior. So I'll have these
Oh,
weird
interesting.
scars, but
That is an
yeah.
interesting comparison. Yeah. I mean, I'm not too worried about the scar, and I did very much like my surgeon as far as surgeons go. He had a very nice bedside manner, which is always helpful. And he knew what he was doing clearly, so that was important, obviously. But yeah, recovery piece, I feel like while it was, I think in the beginning, largely physical, I think over time, again, and I'm only 6 weeks out, so I'm realizing also it's very much like an energetic recovery, a emotional recovery, right? There's so many other layers to the recovery that you're not talking to your doctor about what the emotional recovery is gonna be. So it's like we have to be figuring all these things out ourselves, which is why community and having people in your life is so important because we're doing so much of the care for each other on a day-to-day basis, and that's really where the roots that we have to tend.
Yeah, it is interesting because I am fresh out of, like, the 3rd surgery on that hip just from rare complications, like 1
Yes,
of
I
1%.
heard. Oh my goodness, you've had a row.
A journey, but, even just, like, now, just sitting here, like, it's uncomfortable. I should have grabbed ice before our recording, but, you're just like, I don't know, I wonder if the scar on the inside would be a little less intense because you're not sitting on it. Do you know what I mean? So, anyway, they're all great, whatever you can do. I understand there's even a lateral one. I'm like, they're finding all sorts of ways to get into that hip, you
I
know?
Do you have a robotic assist?
No, I
Oh,
don't
so
think so.
I had a robotic assist on my hip, so which is so fascinating. So the actual surgery, the robot is actually doing all the measurements and calibrating to make sure, like, I guess, they can make sure, like, the width of your femur and the length of your legs, like, something about the robotic assist is really helpful for that. So I have a second scar because it's just a very small one, they put a probe in. But it's just so fascinating, like, the technology that they have to do these surgeries, and my physical therapist was even saying "This didn't happen in the hospital, so basically, like, medieval torture." I was like, "Yeah, it kind of seems that way." But it's like they're so sophisticated now in how they do things, which I think in some ways probably makes the recovery easier, but I think in a lot of other ways, it really, again, losses over that piece of this was like a big experience that I'm still processing, I'm still adjusting to. So there's so much other pieces of care that go around taking care of our bodies as they age. It's not just about the hip and the shoulder and the back and the hormones, right? It's all the other pieces too, the psychological, emotional. Yeah.
Yes. Now, I wonder, is there anything, I'll have to Google, but is there anything written about the psychological or emotional effects, right, of hip replacements?
Right,
Because,
of anything. I mean, in
yeah.
probably not in the West, but I know, like, in a lot of Eastern philosophies, and I probably learned this in yoga, that you tend to hold a lot of emotion in your hips. A lot of stored trauma can go in the hips, and then physiologically, I think it's something about the psoas muscle, but I think neurologically, like, in being a somatic facilitator, it really is about, like, how our bodies are wired to react and process traumatic things, which surgeries in and of themselves are traumatic. They're physically traumatic, and for a lot of people, they can be emotionally and psychologically traumatic as well. So, it's like you're processing on top of the thing that's supposed to be healing for you, something that can also be, like, really difficult, especially if you don't have a constellation of care. Folks who live alone have to deal with going to rehab after because they don't have, so it's in navigating the medical system, which not everybody has great healthcare. So there's so many layers to things, and so I really try to remember that as I'm moving through the world, that it's not just about what I experience and what I have access to. It really is like this whole global perspective of where I am and all of that, but also both the blessings and the gaps that are still there.
Yes, absolutely. It's just listening to you talk, I was just thinking, yes, of course, that's what we say in yoga, right? That all are like we hold a lot of emotion there. It's a lot about letting go and what have you. So I'm like, what does that mean that I have need both hips replaced? But I think with yoga too, I loved hip openers. And I don't know if you're a hip opener girl, but just loved them like pigeon for days. And now I'm like getting on and off the PT table. I'm like falling off every time.
Right? Yeah, I haven't been on the floor for any kind of practice on purpose, like, for any in a very long time. I mean, pre-hip surgery, it was just not available to me, and so I really am thinking about that too, like, now slowly getting back into, like, gentle, tiny movement practices, like walking, but thinking about doing exercises or going back to yoga, which I don't know, again, if it's like we're sitting on the floor, that's not gonna be as accessible for me, so I had been doing a lot of chair yoga just from videos online because there isn't a lot of chair yoga happening, like, at the local studios, unfortunately. So that's a piece of it too, right? There's, like, definitely an age barrier with studios and what's available for exercise for as we age, and it's really built for able-bodied people who are fit and young and have a full range of motion with everything. So that's definitely something I've noticed and have been thinking about more these days.
I do have a chair yoga video on my YouTube channel. I'll
Oh,
send it
good
to you.
stuff. Check it out.
And listeners, I'll link it in the show notes. But
Perfect.
yeah, I hear you. And I am hoping my plan is to go to yin yoga tonight. And but my doctor was like, do not stretch the left hip at all. And I was like, so I messaged the teacher. I'm like, is it okay if I come and I just modify the shit out of it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm not sure how you're gonna do it without stretching. I'm like, well, I guess it's all in the right hip, or I just do other things, but we'll see. We'll see. But
Yeah.
yeah, getting up and down off the floor. But again, even onto exam tables. I went for my post-op yesterday and it's like getting onto that table. I'm like, this, I know it will get better, right? But the healing process is long and it does encourage a little patience.
Right? Oh my gosh, so much patience. And that's if, like, your trajectory is that you are going to get better. And I've, of course, like, having this experience of having a physical disability of now I really have so much more experiential empathy for folks who don't have a trajectory of getting better, that live with chronic pain or disabled bodies in some way, shape, or form. So these are things when we think about activism and organizing too, it's just like we're constantly broadening our lens, understanding where we fit into all of that, and just really having that compassion and awareness to as we move through the world because as you and I continue to get better from our surgeries, like there's plenty of folks who don't have that privilege. And what does that mean? How does that inform the way I move through the world? Which is definitely always something that I'm renegotiating, especially as someone who facilitates things for other folks, both in person and online. So it's an evolution for myself. And again, it always comes back to so what does that mean for how I do things? And so I think that's always something that I'm willing to sort of be in the inquiry with. And it's really uncomfortable. Sometimes as someone who is fairly able-bodied and has a lot of access and privilege to many things, it's really uncomfortable to think about what are the barriers and who are the folks who aren't able to do the things that I can do or be in the kind of spaces that I'm hosting. And that's a really good question for people to practice when they're in community is who is missing from this room and why? Why do you think they might be missing? So that is that I always practice no matter where I am. And just it's a really, really good question just to start to get us thinking about that so we don't we always the saying, we always see the world as we are, which is so true, but we can begin to see the world as others are when we think about who's missing from my space? Why can't so and so have access to this? What are the barriers? So those are the really helpful ways to start thinking about broadening our views.
I like that so much. Yeah, so much. Who's missing from this table? Yeah. And I want to just look at my questions to make sure because that I haven't missed anything that is super important. But it's because we've talked about so much, and sorry about my constant shifting. But for you, what would you say? particularly because I know we've talked a bit about this, about challenges, health and wellness, but also practices and rituals that help you stay grounded. And I think these all kind of tie together and they actually tie into my final questions about finding tranquility in every day. But what are you doing now? I mean, especially A, with mobility issues, but when you all A, so I'd like to know that, but also when you don't have mobility issues or the same, like you're not in the deep healing process. What are you doing to kind of give yourself a sense of grounding and ritual within your overall well-being journey and creativity journey? Because I know that's so powerful for you.
Absolutely. Yes. I have just honed over the many, many, many years of practice, and it always comes back to practice of doing what works for my energy, my rhythm. And I've really developed sort of my own framework. And I don't really think of it that way because now it's so embodied and it's so much just a part of my day to day. Of I've realized I'm a morning person, and all my energy and creativity happens in the morning. And I know not to like try to plan things in the evening if I can help it because my energy won't be as good. I won't be as even optimistic. Like I can tell, like just the flow. And I've gotten to know myself, which I think is hard to do. Like often it's hard to pay attention and be in the present moment with ourselves, especially as we change. So there is a container of rhythm without holding it too rigidly. So I try to have routine, but also stay flexible so I can flow with what comes through. And I realize that the more I am grounded in the things that I need and the things that my own energetic expansion and contraction, the more I'm able to deal with the push and pull of the external things that happen in life and throw us off kilter. And it's managing for now, right? In these particular days, it's managing my pain because that absolutely has an impact on capacity of just being with people or emotional capacity, right? I can tell him if I start getting cranky, do I need something to eat? Do I need to take an Advil? Like, what's going on? So again, it's I work this 5 bodies framework because everything is interconnected, the physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and psychological. So I'm always thinking about these things and tending all those things so I know I can be in the best place and doing that sort of day to day. So that's a big part of my rhythm and ritual. And then I always also I'm very seasonal, so I move with the rhythm of the seasons for sure, and that isn't intentional. It really is my own energetic alignment. Like I can feel in the spring and fall, I definitely have more energy. The solstice seasons, I'm much more internal. I tend to move much slower. The temperatures are extreme. I'm in the Northeast. So like in the winter, I'm like in hibernation, and in the summer, I'm like trying to stay out of this super, super hot weather. But everything is just slowed down a bit. So I really honor the pace of my body. And it's taken a lot of years to practice that because I think we are not trained to do that, especially if you go to public school. Like kids are taught to conform to the container that they're put in, not listen to their own bodies. You can't take a bathroom break. Lunch is only 15 minutes long, so you have to eat fast. Like you're forced into these different shapes. And it's taken me so many years of mindful presence and listening to decontort and really get into my own embodied shape and energy and aliveness to connect with what I need. And it is and has been and continues to be a practice.
I love that. And I think that's a wonderful place to end of just recognizing the importance of practice and the importance of ritual. And you said a few things that I just want to highlight is like being a morning person. I think it takes time to figure out, especially when we come from the energy we came from maybe like 20 years ago. And we're like, well, they just do and do and do. And I would be up until the wee hours handling things. Now I'm like, mama needs to go to bed at 9. And so it's so important to recognize your energy and how your energy does shift with the seasons and really paying attention to that. And thank you for mentioning the 5 kind of embodied parts and principles because I love the idea of you doing somatic work and sharing somatic work and listeners somatic work is, I mean, I guess we would just say in your body, right? Embodied work. And the importance of that because so often we can be trying to figure out something in our head And then it's just, okay, well, ask, how does that feel in your body if you do that? How does it feel in your body if you don't do that? And it takes a while, I think, for people to really recognize, oh, there is a difference. But it can be so helpful the more we become aware of our bodies. So thank you for mentioning and sharing that and for being back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always so great to touch in every few years and just really see, hear, listen, just be in the journey that we're on.
And what a journey it has been.
For sure. I wouldn't have it any other way though, right?
Right.
It's beautiful, amazing, terrifying, difficult, but just so beautiful in so many ways.